Hi, my name's Myrna, and 2 years ago, my parents told me they couldn't afford to send me to college. I said, okay. I swallowed the hurt. I worked. I sacrificed. I smiled. Then one night, I found a receipt, $20,000, for my brother's European tour, paid in full. That's when I realized I wasn't their daughter. I was their silence. But silence doesn't stay quiet forever. Want to know what happened next? It was late August in Asheville, the kind of late summer where the air feels heavy and the light is softer, more forgiving. I sat on a worn bench at the park near my apartment, my journal open on my lap. Across the path, a girl no older than 18 was waving a crisp white envelope at her mother. Even from a distance, I could see the embossed crest on the corner, a college acceptance letter. Her eyes sparkled the way mine once had. I forced a smile and looked back down at my own handwriting, looping and restless on the page. It had been 2 years, yet the moment still burned like it had happened yesterday. The decision that had quietly altered the course of my life had begun right here in this city. People around me kept moving. Kids playing tag, joggers with earbuds, parents holding iced coffees. But my mind drifted backward. I didn't know then that an empty seat in a lecture hall would become a symbol I could never quite shake. Back then, I was 22, still believing my parents when they said, next time. My father, Bishop, had a way of sounding so rational that it made me question my own sense of fairness. My mother, Marceline, would tilt her head just so, looking regretful but never responsible. And my brother Orion, the family's golden child, barely noticed me as he prepared for whatever adventure they'd chosen for him next. I can still see the kitchen table that day. The midday sun streaked through the blinds, catching on the chipped edge of the formica. I had arranged my acceptance letter and financial aid packet neatly, like evidence for a trial. "I've been accepted," I said, my voice steady. "They offered me some aid, but I need help with the rest." My mother didn't look at the papers. She fiddled with the handle of her mug, coffee going lukewarm. "Sweetheart, we're just not in the position right now," she said, the words rehearsed, gentle but final. Dad cleared his throat. "It's not that we don't want to help," he added. "It's just, times are tight." I nodded, because that's what you do when you're the youngest, the quiet one, the one who's been taught to make yourself small. "I understand," I said, folding the letter once, twice, tucking it back into the envelope. My heart felt like glass cracking, but I kept my smile. "I'll figure something out." For the next week, I worked double shifts at the cafe and signed up for more hours babysitting. I told myself it was temporary, that if I could just push through the semester, maybe I'd earn enough. Every time someone congratulated me on the acceptance, I smiled and said, "Thank you," even though I didn't know if I'd ever actually go. Then, one humid afternoon, I stopped by Dad's home office to leave a note. He wasn't there, but the printer was still warm, a fresh page curling on the tray. I picked it up without thinking. "Paid in full, $20,486,000. Orion Acker, Europe study tour, plus personal excursion." The words blurred as I read them again and again. The itinerary listed Rome, Paris, Amsterdam. The departure date was 3 weeks away. I stared at the page, my pulse a low roar in my ears. "It's a scholarship," I whispered, as if saying it aloud could make it true. Maybe it's something else. Maybe. But the credit card statement stapled behind it said, "Bishop Marceline Acker, personal payment." I put the paper back exactly as I'd found it and walked out slowly, my feet numb. The kitchen smelled of onions and butter. Mom was on the phone laughing softly, probably telling a friend about Orion's big trip. I went upstairs, closed my door, and sat on the floor with my back to the bed. For hours, I tried to reason it out. I'd always known Orion was favored. The sports, the travel, the private tutors. But I'd thought when it came to something like college, something serious, the scales might even a little. My acceptance letter sat on the desk, still unopened since I'd put it away after our talk. I looked at it now, the crisp paper like a cruel joke. At dinner, I tried to hint. "It's amazing how much study abroad costs," I said lightly, spooning mashed potatoes. I read some programs go over 20,000. Dad didn't look up from his plate. Yeah, well, education's expensive everywhere, he muttered. Mom smiled tightly. Eat your food, sweetheart. The conversation moved on without me. I kept my face neutral, but inside something shifted. It wasn't anger yet, not even hurt. It was the quiet realization of being unseen, the kind that seeps in like cold water and stays. That night, in my room, I took out the acceptance letter. My hands shook as I unfolded it. The university's crest gleamed in the corner. My name, Myrna Acker, bold and centered. All the possibilities I'd imagined pressed against me like a tide I could no longer hold back. I folded the letter once, twice, slid it back into the envelope, and tucked it deep in my desk drawer. The motion felt like sealing a wound that hadn't yet stopped bleeding. Outside, a car drove past, music thudding faintly. In another room, Orion laughed at something on his phone. I sat in the dark, the envelope cool under my palm, and whispered to no one. So that's how it is. That night, I folded my dream into an envelope and put it away, just like they did to me. I folded the letter once, then twice. My hands moved slowly, deliberately, as if each crease could somehow contain the truth pressing against my ribs. The envelope was soft from how many times I'd opened it, read it, wished the words would change. They didn't. They stayed sharp, final. I tucked it into the drawer beneath a stack of utility bills and takeout menus, as if burying it could make it less real. Outside, night had already claimed the street. The room was dim, lit only by the soft spill of light from the hallway. I could hear the distant sound of Orion's laugh from the guest room down the hall. His voice, rich and carefree, bounced off the walls as if it belonged here more than I ever did. I stood still in the center of my room, a quiet figure in a house that felt less like home and more like a polished showroom, something staged, where I was only ever a shadow. The next morning came too soon. Dawn hadn't even broken when I slipped on my faded sneakers, the same ones I'd bought with my first paycheck as a freshman, and left for work. The cold air bit at my cheeks, and I pulled my scarf tighter around my neck. The world was still mostly asleep, save for a few flickering windows and the soft rumble of the early bus. The diner was already warm, filled with the scent of burnt coffee and fried batter. Vinyl booths squeaked as I passed by. I tied my apron without thought, like muscle memory. As I stepped behind the counter, I greeted the regulars, Charlie, who always asked for extra syrup, Nancy, who left exact change and a handwritten note. I remembered their names, their allergies, their anniversaries. They barely remembered mine. The day moved in small, quiet motions. Orders scribbled, plates wiped, coffee poured. My name wasn't spoken, but my hands were busy. Useful. That was something. Around noon, I sat behind the counter with a styrofoam cup of instant soup. The cook tossed me half a sandwich someone hadn't touched. "Perk of the job," he said with a wink. I smiled politely. "Thanks." I didn't mind. It was something warm in my stomach. You learn not to complain when you're used to surviving on scraps, in more ways than one. When my shift ended, I stepped into the cold again, phone buzzing in my pocket. A notification from Instagram. @OrionAcker just posted a new reel. I opened it without thinking. There he was, sailing along white cliffs, smiling beside a plate of Mediterranean seafood, sipping something pink under a tangerine sunset. Santorini. Mom's comment under the post read, "So proud of you, my love. Dream big." 1,000 likes. A flurry of hearts. I scrolled down to my last post, a blurry photo of my kitchen with a chipped bowl of buttered pasta. Not a single like. Not even from Mom. Back at my apartment, I sat on the edge of my bed, phone still in hand. I typed a message in the family group chat. I got into a startup accelerator today. Small, but it covers my equipment cost. The message went through. I waited. The 3 blinking dots came and went. Then, Orion replied, "Cool story. Share more later." That was it. No follow-up, no congratulations, no proud of you. Later that evening, I was invited back for dinner at my parents' place. A rare occasion when Orion was home. I brought a green salad, baby spinach, fresh vinaigrette, shaved almonds, something nice, Something light. I placed it on the table between the roast and the wine. No one touched it. Dad cleared his throat, eyes fixed on Orion. Your brother's applying to that State Department program, he said, his voice warm with excitement. Diplomacy, travel, maybe even an embassy position someday. Mom lit up like a chandelier. He's always had such charm, she said. Orion leaned back in his chair, confidence draped across him like a tailored suit. Yeah, it's the next step. Just feels like the right direction, you know? I nodded, small and unnoticed. I pushed a piece of lettuce around my plate. Quietly, I offered, I got accepted into that creative startup grant I told you about. Mom looked up, her smile brief, polite. That's nice, dear. Dad kept eating. Orion checked his phone. The conversation shifted right back to him, his travel plans, his expanding network, his ideas for change. They spoke of his future as if it were already legendary. I sat there, a footnote to my own family's narrative. After dinner, I didn't linger. I left quietly, walking home as dusk set in. The streets were empty, lit by the occasional flicker of orange light. I passed a bus stop with a torn poster that read, Your story matters. I stopped for a moment and stared at the words. I didn't know who it was written for, but I knew it wasn't meant for me, not in that moment. I pulled my sweater tighter and kept walking. At home, I sat on the floor of my room, back against the bed, legs pulled to my chest. I reached for the drawer again, pulled out the envelope. I opened it slowly, as though afraid of what it might say this time. Inside, there was no letter. Just the blank page I'd slipped in days ago, white, creased, and painfully silent. It had always been blank. The real letter had been shredded months ago. I'd thrown it out the same day I read the line, We can't offer financial support at this time. We hope you understand. Understand? They didn't hesitate to wire Orion thousands for his gap year, or his internship apartment, or his camera. But my tuition, my studio, my dream? Too much. I clutched the empty paper, pressing it to my chest like it could absorb the ache. It wasn't just that I had been excluded. It was that I had been erased. They saw Orion. Always had. His dreams were worth investing in. Mine were optional. Decorative. I leaned back, eyes tracing cracks on the ceiling. The hum of cars echoed through the window, distant and hollow. Somewhere out there, life kept spinning. Somewhere, people were seen, heard, chosen. And me? I was the echo that faded when the laughter stopped. Tears rolled silently. I wiped them before they fell far, as though even grief needed to be hidden. I whispered into the stillness, into the dark. I wasn't just the one they left behind. I was the one they never really saw to begin with. The truth of it hurt more than the silence. But it also felt like a door. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the end of pretending I needed permission to write it. After whispering those words into the dim room, I stayed still, rigid in that in-between space where pain simmers quietly beneath your skin. I didn't sleep that night. The walls were too loud with memories. The silence wasn't comforting. It was accusing. The city outside buzzed and hummed like nothing had changed, like my world hadn't tilted. Car headlights slid across the ceiling, as if to mock me with their movement, proof that life outside kept going, while I felt frozen, cemented in place by invisible weights. When dawn finally bled into the room, I stood up slowly. My legs were stiff, but my mind was even heavier. I took the envelope I had written the night before, its edges soft from being held too long, and tucked it into a small cardboard box under my bed. It joined a collection of forgotten things: school awards, childhood birthday cards, friendship bracelets that no longer meant anything. Then I pulled on my diner uniform. It smelled faintly of detergent and old coffee, the scent of routine. By the time I reached the diner, the sun had barely risen. A pale orange disk hovered above the blue ridge, soft and sleepy. I clocked in and tied on my apron, hands moving on autopilot. The smell of frying bacon, brewed coffee, and baked biscuits welcomed me like an old friend. There was a comfort in that kind of constancy. Even if it wasn't exciting, it was predictable. Miss Junia was already at her booth. She came every Wednesday and Friday morning, ordered the same thing: scrambled eggs, dry toast, and black coffee. Her gray hair was always pulled back neatly, and her nails painted the softest shade of blue. She carried herself like someone who had been underestimated once and refused to let it happen again. I brought her order over with a quiet, "Morning, Ms. Junia," balancing the tray with one hand. "You have a steady hand," she commented, eyes twinkling over the rim of her mug. I offered a faint smile. Years of practice. She tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "Practice for something better, I hope." I didn't respond, not because I was upset, but because I didn't know how to answer. Better than what? Better for whom? When she left, she tucked her usual tip under the saucer, but there was something else this time, an envelope, folded precisely. I thought maybe it was a thank you note or some coupon she was passing along. On my break, I slid into the break room, my back aching and my feet sore. I pulled out the envelope. Her handwriting was elegant, like it had come from another era. "You're worth more than their neglect. Keep going. Junia." I stared at it, stunned. The words felt like they had heat, like they lit something in my chest that had long been dormant. Nobody had said anything like that to me. Not directly, not with intention. I ran my fingers across the paper, reading it again and again until the ink felt etched into me. I folded it carefully and slipped it into my apron pocket. It felt like cash. No, like something more valuable. Like permission. That night, I read the note again before bed. Then the next night. Then again, days later, after another awkward family text that made me question my sanity. Each time I read her words, something inside me softened, and something else hardened. I couldn't explain it. It felt like standing at the edge of a bridge you weren't sure you wanted to cross. Weeks passed, then months. I kept working the early shifts at the diner, but at night I'd open my laptop and learn. I took free courses on business, branding, social media strategy. I scribbled ideas in a notebook, filled pages with sketches and quotes, product names and logo doodles. At first I started small, hand-painted mugs, inspirational quotes etched on reclaimed wood, bookmarks pressed with dried flowers. My first online order felt like someone had chosen me, not out of obligation. Not because they needed something, but because they liked what I created. That first $100, it felt like $1 million. By the second month, I had repeat customers. $1,000 came in, enough to give me a glimmer of what was possible. I didn't quit my job, not yet, but I walked into the diner a little straighter, a little less like I was just passing through someone else's life. I shared pictures online, my tiny workspace, cluttered with brushes and string. The packages I wrapped with twine and dried lavender. A few strangers commented encouragement. "Beautiful work," or "Can't wait to get mine." My family. They mostly watched in silence. My mom would sometimes like a post without saying anything. Orion never reacted at all. It was like I didn't exist to them unless they needed something. Then, one crisp Wednesday afternoon, my phone buzzed. A message from Mom. "Hey, sweetie, can you help Orion write his personal statement for that fellowship?" I stared at the screen. I hadn't heard from her in weeks. No check-in. No "how are you?" Just a request. I typed, "I'm working late." An hour later, "We heard you're doing well. So proud of you. Your brother could really use your business sense for his new project." And there it was. It hit me like a cold splash of water. My little wins weren't proof of my growth to them. They were signs that I had value again, value they could use. My phone buzzed again, but I didn't check. I just set it down and stared at the ceiling. That night, during the lull between dinner rush and close, I passed by Mrs. Junia's booth. She looked up from her crossword puzzle. "How's that little shop of yours?" I hesitated. "Growing," I said finally. She smiled, a knowing sort of smile. "Don't let them use you up, Myrna. Build something that's yours. Something they don't get to take credit for." I nodded, but I didn't trust myself to say anything more. Later, I lay in bed and pulled her letter from the drawer. The paper was soft at the corners now, like it had aged along with me. I smoothed the creases, ran my fingers across her careful script. For the first time, I whispered, the room still and quiet around me. I'm not sure I want them to come back at all. And strangely, that didn't feel like a loss. It felt like clarity. The words I'd whispered into my empty apartment days ago still lingered in the corners of every room, like smoke that refused to clear. I told myself I was fine. I kept moving, filling orders, wiping counters, exchanging polite smiles with customers, clocking in and out of shifts like clockwork. But even in my quietest moments, that whisper echoed beneath everything. I was trying to survive in silence, and silence has a way of exposing the truth louder than words ever could. Then on a gray, wet Thursday, my phone rang. The screen flashed Mom. I almost let it ring out, but some mix of obligation and habit made me swipe to answer. Her voice had that honey-sweet tone she saved for manipulation. We're having a little get-together this weekend. Just family. Orion's flying in from DC and it's been ages. You should come. Everyone's been asking about you. Everyone. A word she used when she meant herself, or no one. Still, I hesitated. Declining would give them more to talk about. Myrna's always so distant. She thinks she's too good for us. She never makes time for family. I could already hear Aunt Glenda's passive-aggressive commentary playing in the background of my mind like a bad soundtrack. Sure, I said, my voice even. What time? Saturday came with clouds like bruises overhead. Charlotte felt colder than it should have for fall. I parked my worn-out Corolla across the street from Aunt Glenda's brick house. The windows were aglow with soft yellow light. Laughter leaked out through the walls like smoke from a chimney. I sat in the car for a moment, adjusted the collar of my thrift store dress, reapplied lip balm like it could protect me. Then I stepped out into the rain-damp air, locking the car behind me with a beep that felt too loud for my mood. Inside, the house buzzed. Children darted around adults. Wineglasses clinked. A pot roast smell thickened the air, mingled with expensive perfume and the faint whiff of judgment. "Myrna!" Aunt Glenda called, arms wide like a sitcom hug. She pulled me in close, but there was no warmth in her touch, only a glance downward at my shoes and a too-tight smile. "You look busy." "Always," I replied, brushing rain from my sleeves. Orion stood near the fireplace, tie half untied like a polished politician off duty. He laughed easily, confidently, surrounded by cousins who hung on his every word. That golden child aura had never dulled. His success seemed to reflect back on the whole family, something they could all bask in, brag about. Mom appeared beside me with a plate in hand. "You're late," she whispered. "We already started." "Traffic," I lied. The long oak table in the dining room stretched like a runway. Candles flickered down the center. I took the seat farthest from the head of the table. No one made room. My salad sat wilted in front of me. No one noticed. Dinner began with clinks of silverware and wine glasses raised. Conversations swirled. Vacations, new jobs, new houses. I smiled where I should, laughed when it was expected. Mostly, I stayed quiet, a shadow taking up space. And then came the moment. Aunt Glenda, swirling her wine glass with dainty fingers, looked right past me and said to no one in particular, "I still can't believe your parents spent 20 grand on that Europe trip. We all thought that money was set aside for Myrna's college fund." The sentence landed with the precision of a pin dropping in a cathedral. Forks paused, glasses stilled mid-air. I didn't look at anyone. I didn't need to. I felt every pair of eyes flick toward me and then quickly away, like I was radioactive. I turned slowly to Mom and Dad. Mom's smile stiffened, cracking at the edges. Dad cleared his throat and looked down at his plate. Excusing myself felt automatic, like my legs made the decision before my brain could. I pushed back my chair, the wooden legs screeching against tile, and walked toward the hallway like a ghost. I found them in the kitchen, arms crossed, avoiding my gaze like it might cost them something. "You told me you couldn't afford college," I said. My voice was low, but my chest burned. Mom folded a napkin like it was a puzzle. "It wasn't that simple, Myrna." "Then simplify it." I said, trembling. You looked me in the eye when you said there was no money. I worked double shifts, took out loans. I gave up so much. Dad stepped in. Orion needed that experience. We thought it would broaden his worldview. He'd been working so hard. And I hadn't? I whispered. What did I need, huh? A plane ticket to nowhere? A pat on the back while I drowned in debt? Mom's eyes darted toward the door. This isn't the place, sweetheart. I stared at her. It never is. It's never the place when it's about me. Dad sighed. We supported you in different ways. You always managed. Orion needed more of a push. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're right. I did manage. On my own. I didn't wait for another excuse. When I walked back in, the conversation had resumed. Orion was talking about wine tastings in Bordeaux. Someone made a joke. Everyone laughed. My chair was still slightly pulled out, my plate untouched. No one asked if I was okay. I sat down and picked up my fork, though I had no appetite. I tore a piece of bread, chewed it like cardboard, listened as the people around me spun stories that didn't include me. Their voices blurred into static. And I realized something, not in anger, but in clarity. Maybe they hadn't lied when they said they couldn't afford it. They just couldn't afford it for me. Driving back from Charlotte felt like moving through molasses. The city disappeared in my rearview mirror, its skyline swallowed by mist and memory. The highway stretched ahead like a long, tired sigh, lined with trees that looked as though they were bleeding copper and rust. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't turn the music up loud to drown my thoughts. I drove in silence. That kind of silence that doesn't ask for peace. It simply exists, weighty and alive. What I felt wasn't numbness, not exactly. It was clarity, like something had finally settled in me, clicked into place after years of being slightly off. I wasn't spiraling anymore. I wasn't waiting for an apology that would never come. What I felt was more final, like the quiet thud of a door shutting in the distance, soft but permanent. By the time I reached Asheville, the sky had turned that moody shade of twilight purple that always made the town feel like a painting. My apartment lights glowed faintly through the windows, waiting for me. I parked and stepped into the familiar scent of cardboard, paper, and citrus, remnants of boxes I'd unpacked but hadn't really opened. My life was still half in storage, half in transition. Maybe that was who I was now, someone between places, between roles. On the kitchen table, right where I had left it, sat the thick acceptance envelope, the one from the Downtown Business Incubator program, full scholarship, a mentor in the startup world, free office space, access to a community of investors. I hadn't touched it since the morning it came, hadn't even opened the full contents until now. I slowly peeled back the seal, unfolded the documents, and spread them across the table like a blueprint for a life that was mine, and mine alone. My name was right at the top, Myrna Acker. Not co-signed by a parent, not funded by a sibling, not a legacy slot from someone else's connections. Mine. Earned through the online store I'd built late into the night while they all slept or dismissed it as a cute little hobby. I included letters of recommendation from 2 of my former teachers, both of whom had quietly mentored me after high school, cheering me on when my family didn't bother to ask about my future. I added a printed copy of my first full tax return from the shop. I organized everything neatly into a navy blue folder. And then, I don't know why I did it, I opened the old photo box tucked at the back of my closet. There she was, 6 years old, frosting on her cheeks, eyes lit up like sparklers. I remembered that day. Mom had made a cake with the words, "You are our future," in uneven icing. Dad had ruffled my hair and said, "That's our girl." It was before Orion became the chosen one, the center of everything. Before everything shifted and I began to disappear in my own family. I placed that photo on top of the documents, her gap-toothed smile gazing up like a gentle ghost. I closed the folder and sat with it in my lap for a while. No tears, no anger, just that same strange stillness, the kind that comes after a long, personal storm. The next morning, a gray, damp Sunday, I drove to the family home. The streets were quiet, littered with wet leaves that stuck to my tires, the kind of morning that smelled like earth and endings. Mom's car was in the driveway. I knew she'd be home. I reached under the porch mat where the spare key had always been hidden, a habit she never thought to change. The lock clicked, and I stepped inside. The house smelled exactly as I expected. Brewed coffee, lemon cleaner, and faint traces of perfume clinging to the air. The furniture hadn't changed. The same framed photos lined the hallway, all showcasing Orion's milestones, his awards, his laughter frozen in time. I didn't bother looking for mine. I knew better by now. The kitchen was empty. Good. I walked in and placed the blue folder carefully on the table, aligning it with the patterned placemats like it belonged there. The photo peeked out just enough to be noticed. I didn't want to hide it, but I didn't want to force it in their face either. Just a quiet reminder of a promise they once made, and how far they'd drifted from it. Then I turned to leave. I had almost reached the front door when Mom's voice stopped me. "Myrna?" I turned. She stood at the edge of the hallway, phone in hand, expression somewhere between curiosity and suspicion. "What's this?" "Something you once said you wanted," I replied, keeping my voice soft. She walked over, flipped open the folder. Her eyes scanned the scholarship offer, the letters, the tax return. Her mouth tightened. "Your incubator scholarship? Why would you bring this here?" "You said you wanted me to do something worthwhile," I said. "This is it." She frowned. "You could have just told us, sent a text. You didn't have to make a scene." I almost laughed, not from humor, but from the absurdity. "This isn't a scene, Mom. It's a statement. A text disappears. This stays." Her face twitched, something behind her eyes stirring. "Myrna, I'm not asking for anything," I said gently. "I just wanted to leave this. Whether you look at it or not, that's up to you." She opened her mouth again, but I was already stepping away. Her voice chased me softly. "Why are you acting like this? We're proud of you." I paused at the door, hand resting on the knob. I didn't turn around. "Are you?" I asked. Silence. The kind of silence that answers everything. I walked out without slamming the door, without raising my voice, without expecting anything. The air was cold and smelled of rain. I got into my car, rolled down the windows, and sat there for a moment, letting the wind wash over me. My hands didn't tremble. My heart didn't race. They could open the folder or pretend it didn't exist. They could look at that little girl's smile and feel something, or nothing at all. That wasn't my responsibility anymore. I was done performing for them, done shrinking myself for their approval, done waiting for applause that would never come. I drove away, not in anger, not in grief, but in quiet liberation. They never opened the folder, but I did. And in doing so, I opened a future they never believed I'd reach, and this time, I didn't need their eyes to see it. They never opened the folder, but I did. I opened a future they never believed I'd reach. It wasn't revenge, not yet. It wasn't even anger. At least not the kind that explodes. It was quieter, more deliberate, the kind that simmers just under the surface and reshapes everything, the kind that stops waiting. 3 days after they ignored my acceptance letter, I was sitting cross-legged on my worn couch, the edges of a blanket pooled around my feet as soft spring air drifted through the cracked window. The light hit just right, casting golden streaks across my coffee table, where unopened mail and a cold mug of tea sat untouched. I wasn't expecting anything that day. I was scrolling aimlessly through my phone, passing photos of food, of people laughing in curated perfection, when I saw it. The message. A ping from the family group chat lit up the screen. "Hope to see you all for dinner Saturday night. Orion's birthday, Ember's Hearth, 7 p.m. I stared at it long enough for the screen to dim and reflect my face. My reflection looked older than I remembered, not in years, but in something else. Weight, distance. I tapped the screen again, reading it a second time. Ember's Hearth. That name punched the air out of my lungs. I once called it my someday place. When I was little, I'd press my nose to its fogged windows every time we passed it in winter. It was where dreams wore candlelight and linen. I used to whisper, one day, thinking maybe I'd go there after graduation, or on my birthday, or the day something finally felt like mine. I remembered asking once, just once, if we could go there for my high school graduation dinner. They laughed like I had asked for the moon, said it was too expensive, said we could celebrate at home. We didn't. And now, without hesitation, they reserved that same place for Orion. I looked back at the group chat, heart pounding but steady. I'll stop by briefly. No emojis, no fake smile, just that. Then I turned the phone over, screen down, and let the silence swallow it. Saturday came fast. Dusk fell like a soft curtain over the city, and I stood outside Ember's hearth, staring through the warm windows. The golden glow from inside spilled onto the sidewalk, a soft halo wrapping around every couple, every clink of silverware. Inside, life was framed like a painting. Tables dressed in white, walls lined with books, and candles flickering like old memories. I hesitated only once before walking in. The scent of rosemary, garlic, and aged wine embraced me the moment I stepped through the doors. The hostess barely looked at me before I said, "Not part of the party. Just a table for one." She led me to a quiet booth near the window, far from the reserved long table at the back where my family had gathered. I could see them, but they couldn't see me, or maybe they didn't want to. I watched as Orion laughed loudly, gifts stacked around him like miniature towers of praise. Mom beamed, her eyes shining like he had just been crowned. Dad toasted with a glass of something too expensive. My name didn't come up. I knew that even without sound. My fingers tightened around my backpack. Slowly, I unzipped it and pulled out a small, faded notebook, my childhood journal. The edges were worn, the cover creased, but inside were the untouched, uncensored truths of who I once was. I flipped through the pages slowly. Each one was a window into a younger version of myself, 10-year-old me, scribbling in crooked handwriting. I want to go to college. I want to be someone who matters. I want a necklace with my name on it. I want to eat at Ember's hearth. I blinked fast. The pages trembled in my hands. I had dreamed so quietly, so obediently. I thought if I followed all their rules, if I played small enough not to take up space, they'd reward me eventually. Instead, they gave my dreams to someone else. I turned to the last blank page, the end of my childhood, and I wrote, 4. To no longer need to be chosen. I stared at it. Just 6 words. But it took everything I had not to cry in the middle of that restaurant. I pulled out my phone, snapped a picture of the page, and sent it to the family group chat. No caption, no explanation, let them figure it out. Then I placed the notebook gently back into my bag. My hands shook, but not with fear. Something else. Like I had just finally stepped out from behind a door I didn't know I'd been locked behind. At the back of the restaurant, someone shouted Orion's name as he opened another gift. Laughter burst like fireworks. Mom was clapping again. I imagined, just for a second, one of them glancing at their phone, reading my words in that moment. A flicker of silence, perhaps, a question rising like smoke, too late to stop it. I stood up quietly and walked out without waiting for the check. I had never felt lighter. Outside, the wind kissed my face, soft and cool. I could still hear the faint sounds of the restaurant behind me, but they felt far away, like echoes from a story I had stopped reading. For the first time, I didn't walk away feeling excluded. I walked away feeling free. They celebrated him with everything I once wished for. But tonight, I celebrated me. My silence had ended. This was my first push back, and I wasn't done. I stared down at the message I had typed on my phone. It sat there on the screen, simple, truthful, sharp. But my thumb hovered above the send button, unmoving. Something about pressing it felt final, irreversible, and yet leaving it unsent felt like permission. Permission for them to keep walking over me. I locked the screen instead. Outside the restaurant, the night air was cool and crisp. It wrapped around me like a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. I tilted my face upward, watching the quiet dance of city lights reflected off windows and passing cars. My pulse began to slow, my shoulders loosened. I was still alive, still me. No matter how they tried to erase, belittle, or sideline me, I hadn't disappeared. Not yet, and I wasn't going to. A month passed. I didn't hear from them. No calls, no texts. I should have expected that. Silence had always been the family's favorite form of punishment. But then came the invitation. Printed, glossy, and mailed like it meant something, a family reunion at the community center in Charlotte, the kind of gathering where they'd plaster on fake smiles and pretend everything was stitched together with love. I nearly tore it up, but something inside me said, "Go. Not for them, for you." So I did. The drive to Charlotte was long, but it gave me time to prepare, mentally, emotionally. I played music, rehearsed conversations in my head, imagined scenarios. I reminded myself that this time, I wasn't coming to blend into the background. I wasn't coming to nod and smile through passive-aggressive digs or let them pretend I didn't exist. Not anymore. When I finally pulled into the community center parking lot, the sun had started to dip. Warm golden light made the building glow, but I felt none of that warmth. My hands trembled slightly as I turned off the ignition. The engine ticked down, like a clock winding toward confrontation. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. My blouse was clean and pressed. I'd done my hair. I looked like someone who belonged. I whispered to my reflection, "You're not going there to beg for space. You already own your place." Then I stepped out. Inside, the hall buzzed with conversation. Laughter, the clatter of forks against plates, the unmistakable smell of catered chicken, green beans, and buttery mashed potatoes filled the air. People gathered in circles, arms linked around waists and shoulders, posing for photos, recounting memories. I didn't walk in loud or eager. I walked in steady. No one noticed me at first. I was used to that. I lingered near the wall, sipping punch from a paper cup, scanning the room. Aunt Denise wore her usual sequins. Uncle Ray told the same military story he told every reunion. Fiona snapped selfies with anyone who'd say yes. Mom clung to her plastic wine cup like it was a lifeline. Dad paced, nodding to every guest like a mayor in his own mind. Then I heard his voice. "Orion." He stood at the front, behind a microphone on the small stage. The crowd shifted their attention to him. He always had that ability. Mr. Charisma. His voice boomed confidently. "Let's take a second to recognize everyone who made this happen tonight." People clapped. He called out a few names, caterers, decorators, even someone's florist. Then, as if tossing out a footnote, he said, "And I couldn't have pulled it off without my assistant, Myrna. She helps me with reports and emails and all the behind-the-scenes stuff." Laughter. A few people clapped awkwardly. Someone near me whispered, "His assistant?" I felt eyes flick toward me. My ears rang. The word hung in the air like a slap. Assistant? I stepped forward before my body could debate the decision. "No," I said clearly. My voice didn't shake. It didn't need to be loud. It cut through the room like glass. "I'm not his assistant. I'm his sister." Gasps. Murmurs. A few eyebrows raised in disbelief. I saw Fiona press her lips together. Mom went pale. Dad looked like he'd swallowed a bee. Orion froze on stage, smile fading like a glitching signal. I held his gaze. He blinked first. I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked outside. The air was colder now. Streetlights cast long shadows over the pavement. I leaned against the brick wall of the center, my breath visible in the evening chill. I scrolled my phone mindlessly, needing something, anything to pull me out of the spiral rising inside. A buzz. Orion's name flashed on the screen. Sorry if that came off wrong. Didn't mean to make it weird. That was it. No ownership. No apology, just casual deflection, like always. 10 minutes passed. Then the message disappeared. Deleted. As if he'd never sent it. No follow-up, no call, nothing. That was when it hit me. They didn't see me. Not truly. Not even now. No matter what I accomplished or how hard I tried, I was always something less. An assistant, a background character in their glossy family script. I closed my eyes and breathed in the cold air. I thought of all the birthdays they forgot, all the achievements they brushed aside, all the times I sat silently while they erased me in plain sight. Not anymore. I stood straight, pulled out my phone again, and opened my notes app. Inside it were drafts, speeches, memories, truths I had never shared. I'd written them late at night, not sure I'd ever have the courage to say them aloud, but I whispered now, just to myself. If they want to silence me in public, then public is exactly where I'll speak next. I turned back toward the hall. The lights glowed warm behind the sliding glass doors. I no longer cared if they welcomed me in. I wasn't asking for permission. I had something to say, and this time they were going to hear it. I stepped into the banquet hall in downtown Asheville, the click of my heels swallowed by plush carpeting and polite conversation. In my bag, I carried a folder of carefully arranged slides, evidence, memory, truth, the kind that couldn't be dismissed with a tight smile or a scoff. Overhead, golden chandeliers threw soft light across the room, catching the shine of wine glasses and sequined dresses. The tables were draped in white linen, accented with navy satin ribbons and small centerpieces of white roses. Every detail looked curated, expensive, intentional, just like the version of me they wanted to present tonight. I walked past people who greeted me with that southern blend of warmth and weaponized politeness. "Welcome home, sweetheart. So proud of you, dear. You've grown up so beautifully." Their smiles were wide, but their eyes wandered, measuring, calculating. Not all of them expected me to be here tonight. Not all of them wanted me to be. I nodded to each one, offering nothing more than a polite tilt of the head. My lips did not curve into a smile. My cheeks were tight, my chest tighter. At the front of the room stood a large easel, holding a card that took up nearly half the space. Gold script over a navy backdrop read, "Congratulations, Myra. We always believed in you." Myra, not Myrna. They had dropped the N. Again. I stared at it, the mistake as sharp as a slap. It wasn't the first time. It wouldn't be the last. My name was simple, but they always found a way to get it wrong, at school plays, at church announcements, even on birthday cakes. They never seemed to care enough to fix it, and now, even here, at the event that was supposed to honor my return, my success, my hard-won survival, they still couldn't be bothered. A flush of cold burned through my chest. I forced myself to move forward. As I approached the podium, applause broke out. Shallow clapping, some forced, some genuine. My mother was glowing in a sequined navy gown. My father smiled too wide, one hand guiding me toward the microphone. Orion stood beside the misspelled card, clapping with a bit too much enthusiasm, like he needed this moment to validate himself too. I stepped up to the mic. My voice caught for a moment, then steadied. "Thank you for this event," I began, my tone even. Then I glanced at the card. "Though I see you got my name wrong, but that's okay." The room fell quiet. A few polite chuckles. Then, nothing. I felt it then. That moment where everything sharpens, the stillness before a shift. I felt the weight of years on my shoulders, the small slights that had accumulated like dust in corners, the betrayals disguised as family tradition. A ping buzzed from my phone. I glanced at the screen. Group chat. Aunt Glenda, Orion, Mom. "Glenda, let her have her moment. Her little startup phase is cute." "We'll be over soon anyway." My fingers trembled, not from surprise, but from the sheer exhaustion of being underestimated, again. I looked out at the sea of familiar faces. No one said anything. Not a sound. "I wasn't going to say much tonight," I said into the microphone. "But since we're all gathered here, I'd like to share something." I pulled the remote from my pocket and clicked. The projector flickered behind me, and an image appeared. Me at 22, hunched over a chipped desk with instant ramen in a cup and a broken laptop beside me. Next slide. A letter with no return address, marked, "Return to sender." The one I had sent home during college, hoping for encouragement. The one that never made it past the mailbox. Murmurs started in the crowd. Another click. A scanned list I had written at age 9. Things I want for my birthday: a real hug, someone to clap at my school play, a bed that doesn't creak. Faces shifted, eyebrows furrowed. Wine glasses were set down quietly. I kept going, slide after slide, hospital bills. I paid without ever being asked, receipts from nights I funded their parties anonymously, proof of loans I gave them when Orion's business accidentally overdrafted their account. Then, the final slide. A black and white photo of me at 6, standing alone in front of a cake with the words, "You are our future," piped in shaky icing. The words faded into the next slide. You told me daughters must forgive. I taught myself daughters must survive. Silence. Aunt Glenda's face turned a shade paler. Orion's grin vanished, his jaw tightening. My mother's smile dropped, her lips parted, closed, then opened again. No words came. My father looked like he might say something, but his hand simply fell away from the podium, useless. I stared at them all for a beat longer. Then I stepped back from the microphone. No dramatic exit, no tears, just quiet certainty. I walked off stage. No applause followed me, but I wasn't looking for it. Outside, string lights wound their way along the brick walls of the venue, casting soft glows onto the pavement. I stepped out into the crisp night air and inhaled deeply. The air smelled like autumn and rain and something freer than I'd felt in years. For so long, they had tried to shrink me, to flatten my voice, to correct my narrative, to define me in terms convenient to them. Tonight, I rewrote all of it. I didn't wait for anyone to follow me out. I didn't need witnesses to my piece. For the first time, I stood entirely alone, and that, I realized, meant I was finally standing tall. I didn't go home right after the banquet. Instead, I drove aimlessly, my fingers drumming against the steering wheel as the cool spring night brushed against my cheeks through the open window. Riverside Drive shimmered under streetlights, downtown Asheville alive with soft chatter, clinking glasses, and couples leaning into each other as they spilled out of candlelit bistros. The city felt untouched by everything I had just lived through. And maybe that's why I kept driving. Maybe I needed to breathe in something that didn't carry their name on it. For 3 full days, I didn't hear a word from my family. No angry voicemails, no vague texts, not even a hollow, "We saw the video." It was as if they collectively decided that silence was the punishment they'd use this time. But it didn't sting like it used to. Their silence wasn't an absence anymore. It was confirmation. Proof that the only loyalty they ever honored was to the version of the story that kept them comfortable. I could imagine the scenes: Mom sipping her bitter black coffee with a tight jaw, Dad pretending to be immersed in his newspaper, Orion watching his phone light up with messages praising his strong, talented sister without daring to call me himself. Their silence was cowardice, and I wasn't afraid of it anymore. On the 4th morning, I opened my mailbox and found a small, cream-colored envelope. No name, no return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable, neat, angled, and full of care. Ms. Junia. My heart gave a little skip. I carried it inside like it might crumble if I moved too fast. Sitting at the chipped kitchen counter, I peeled it open carefully. Inside was a single piece of thick stationery, folded once, written in blue ink. They may never say it, but I will. I'm proud of the woman you've become. I always knew you'd bloom, even in rocky soil. You've turned what they tried to bury you with into roots. I read the words again, and again. My hand went to my mouth. I wasn't someone who cried easily, not anymore, but tears slipped past anyway, silent and stubborn. I pressed the letter against my chest and let the moment crack open, something gentle in me. After a long while, I smoothed the page, folded it carefully, and placed it under a sunflower magnet on the fridge, my new North Star. The days moved forward. I kept my rhythm. Mornings spent prepping shipments for my small online business. Afternoons at the co-working space, drafting grant proposals. Evenings spent quietly, planning a new chapter for myself, the scholarship fund I'd been dreaming about. But the letter lingered like a soft hand on my back, steady, unseen, always there. A week later, I returned to the diner. The same one where I'd first met Ms. Junia. The place hadn't changed: worn red booths, the scent of bacon and black coffee, a jukebox that still played songs older than my parents. And there she was, seated in her usual spot near the window, a novel in one hand and a half-empty mug in front of her. Her gray coat was draped over the seat beside her like a habit she couldn't break. She looked up and smiled. "No speeches," she said as I slid into the booth. "Just coffee." We didn't speak about the banquet. Not directly. We talked about the daffodils blooming too early, about how she'd taken up embroidery again, about a book she was reading on Southern quilting techniques. When she asked how the business was going, there was no judgment, no comparison to someone else's path. Just real interest. "I've been working on something new," I offered after a moment. "A nonprofit, scholarships and mentorships, for kids like I was, who never get told yes." She didn't respond right away. Then she reached out, gently laying her hand over mine. "You're building something that matters," she said. Her eyes shone. "They might not say it, but I will again. I'm proud." "Thank you," I whispered, swallowing the lump in my throat. Before I could say more, a familiar figure paused near our table. Uncle Thaddeus. He looked older, slower, wearier, but his presence still carried weight. He held his hat in both hands, eyes a little wet. "They should have clapped for you," he said. "They should have stood. And I should have been one of them. I'll clap now if it still counts." He brought his calloused hands together. Once. Twice. The sound small, yet powerful in that quiet diner. I felt every beat. "It does," I answered softly. "But not for me. For the girl I used to be. The one they tried to erase." He gave a quiet nod, then turned to the counter for his coffee, leaving behind something wordless and healing. When I stepped outside, the rain had stopped. The clouds were lifting, revealing that gentle, washed-out blue sky that only appears after storms. I didn't walk home right away. Instead, I strolled toward the university I never got to attend. Students passed by, laughing, notebooks under their arms, worlds ahead of them. And I wasn't jealous. I was peaceful. I stood at the iron gate, watching the campus I once dreamed of. In my tote bag was a folder. Inside it, a fully formed proposal for a mentorship program. Not just scholarships, but microgrants, skill-building workshops, access to opportunity. For every girl told, "Don't reach too high." For every boy told, "You're not the type." For every forgotten name. I didn't need applause from a stage anymore. I didn't need their permission to matter. Because sometimes, the loudest applause doesn't come with thunder. It's a whisper, a folded letter, a quiet clap in a diner, a breath you draw when you finally know who you are and love that person fully. That night, as I passed by the old campus gate, I gave myself that applause, and I kept walking forward. Sometimes, the people who are supposed to love us the most are the ones who hurt us the deepest. But healing doesn't always come with their apology. It often begins when we stop waiting for it. Myrna's story reminds us that our worth isn't defined by their silence or favoritism, but by the strength it takes to rise anyway. What would you have done in her shoes? Have you ever had to walk away to find peace? If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe for more powerful, true family stories that hit home.